Bibles, turn to Ephesians, the 5th chapter, the 25th and 29th verse. I like these verses. I tell her to these. So, wives, Christ also of the church, and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. You know, we think about marriage, of course, not last month, you know, we looked at mothers and their roles that they play. And, you know, I think fathers have probably more responsibilities than mothers do. And I got thinking about that. You know, I thought about that. So what I look at, we are Christian folks, right? We're members of the church, the Christian faith. And as I was preparing this, my mind kind of sidetracked, because, you know, I'm very big against divorce and I'm very big family oriented. So I researched. I just typed in this one little word: divorce in the church. Well, you'd be surprised to know that the divorce rate inside the church is anywhere from 35 to 50%. And, you know, Christians who rarely attend church, that rate is higher. Protestants, which we are part of a denomination, have the highest divorce rate among all denominations. So we think about that. Of course, you know, like I said, my parents divorced back when I was probably 16 years old, and that was, and when Dottie and I got married, and when I counsel couples, that's one of the things we discuss, because, you know, we live in a day and age where if we expect that trend to stop, we have to be vocal about it, because, you know, the thing is, most people, when they get married, they think they have an option. Well, you don't have an option, you know, because I think, you know, I try to be, you know, the one and done. Now I know there is outstanding circumstances. You know, divorce, I mean, marriages can only stay marriages as long as both parties want it to be. If one says no, it's done. I mean, you know, and that's it. I mean, but then we look at the father's responsibility, because today is Father's Day. So some news to cheer you up. You know, there's 18.3 million kids that's 1 in 4 children will go to bed tonight in a home without a father. You know, fathers are absent from about 80% of the American households. And, you know, if you do the research, you'll find out the United States is number 1 when it comes to this. All other countries fall far behind. So, I mean, you know, that's some things to think about. But today, we're looking at 4 things. 4 responsibilities of fathers. I know you're excited. I know your mothers are excited about that right there. I know that. But, you know, the thing is that we sometimes say, well, you know, I kind of really drop the ball and not really done all this. But, you know, the good news is this, that you can change. You can level up in your fatherhood skills. And so that's good news. You know, God has determined that the rudder of the family is the father. Statistics verify that a man is the rudder. Now, let me ask you this. All right, if a child, you know, consider the following. If a child accepts Christ first, there's a 3.5% chance the whole family becomes Christians. If a mother accepts Christ, there is a 17% chance of the whole family becoming followers of Christ. And if the father accepts Christ, first, there is a 93% chance the whole family will follow Christ. Have you ever heard that before? Nobody's ever heard that? I've heard that over and over and over and over again. So when I was looking at that, but there is no proof that backs that up. I thought, I've said that, I've heard that for years. And I thought, well, I'm going to, because I like to be factual. I like to find the study to come up with that. There's no study that come up with that. But, because it's always the opposite. Most of the time, if you can draw the kids in, then the parents will come and see what the kids are, what's keeping the kids company. They won't be a part of that. So we look at that. All right, so let's get started. I know you're ready. Responsibility number 1. The Bible commands you to love your wife. Sometimes, a lot of times, this isn't always the easiest thing to do. The first way that we can improve on being a husband is simply loving our wives. Now, the Bible, nowhere does the Bible tell you to love her only if she's lovable. Because I guarantee you, just as I told the wives last month, sometimes that person that you live with 24/7 is not a very good person. They're just, yeah. But the thing that we realize is this, and I'm going to get to it in just a minute. So you ask the question, how do I love my wife? Remember the verse that we read? Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. Now, we see the Bible gives this definition how to love her, as Jesus loved his church. Now, we look at that, and I've heard a lot of people say that, I don't mind dying for my wife. If an intruder was to break in the house, I would rush him and I would give my life for her. If we were driving down the road, if we were carjacked, all that, I would do everything that was in my power to make sure that I took care of her. I don't mind giving my life for her. But listen, what Jesus is telling here is to put her first. That's the whole thing. When Jesus was telling that, that Jesus' death on the cross was for his people. He didn't spare them. What he did, he willingly sacrificed. So what Jesus is telling us is this. The Bible isn't calling on their husbands to just die for their wives, but do that if it's needed. The Bible is calling on you to love your wife like you would yourself. Care for yourself. Now, you don't love your wife by putting your wife second. The opposite of love is self-centeredness. And self-centeredness is the quickest and surest way to poison your marriage. And the thing that this day and age, the marriage is not like it was back in the older days. I love the old shows. Leave It to Beaver. Everybody has their place, don't they? Everybody knows their place. You look at all those old sitcoms, and the thing of it was this. You notice several things about them. What did the man wear? The man always wore suits to go to work. Women always. But we look at that. When we look at marriage, the thing that forms men is how they were raised. Perhaps you came from a single parent family and you never knew a father growing up. So you never knew what really manhood was supposed to be like or how to treat a lady. Maybe you never saw a real marriage up close. So you're trying to figure it out as you go along. Or perhaps you had a male around the house that just wasn't a good role model. That's one of the things that I keep in mind when we talk to people about Christ. how you picture your father at home. A lot of times when you witness to people about a loving father, the last thing they want is some father because they knew what home life was like. That's a real thing there. But husbands, if you love her before and more than you love yourself, you'll improve your husband's skills. If you do for her what you want to do for yourself, you will give her a better marriage. If you give her the attention that you give to other people around her, then you will help tremendously. But you know what happens it's a terminology they call, it says single people problems mask themselves. In other words, it's this. Most of our issues that we have in our marriages are often blamed on our spouse. For example, my house would be a lot better if Dottie would just do what I tell her to do. Would. Every man in here, your house would be better if your spouse would just do what they knew they were supposed to do, right? Yeah. I'm not going. I can say that. Mine's not up here yet. But that's the mindset that we have in today's society. We hear, and how it goes is like this. You sit down with a counselor, and it starts like this. The counselor will say, what's going on? And he starts by saying, she always blank. And she says blank. And he asks her, well, what about you? And she says, he always blanks. And that's a common thinking when you're experiencing marriage strife. There are, because what happens is this. We get that single mind thinking going on in our head. And the thing is this, you're not single. That's the thing that people have to realize, that there are no married people problems. There's only single people problems that are exposed in marriage. Your marriage is suffering because you are experiencing single people problems. That's one of the hardest things. Of course, I've been married so long, it's hard for me to remember what it was like in the beginning. But it's a struggle. Because why? Because two people come from different places, and all of a sudden you're placed together. And, one thing you realize is this. That person you married somehow changed by the time the wedding ceremony took place, because now sometimes you don't know who they are. And it's different to get used to that because you have to form a union. That's the thing. The Bible tells us that when we leave our parents, cleave together. That's the thing. People will leave their parents, but they don't never really cleave together. And it's so easy to walk away from problems, to walk away from responsibilities. It's so easy. The epidemic in our culture says, well, if this don't work out, maybe the next one will. We need to quit that thinking. Like I said, I know divorce is a thing, but the thing is, we go into marriage thinking, well, if this don't work out, it's not able to be done. We need to quit that mindset, especially in the church. Number 2 is this. Do not provoke your children to anger. Ephesians 6:4 says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Let me share with you a real eulogy this girl wrote for her father's funeral. This is her words. The gentleman was a Leslie Sharping. He died from complications of cancer in 2017. Now, going against the norm, saying a few nice words about the deceased, his daughter wrote a brutal, honest obituary about her father. Posted to the funeral home's website. This took place in Texas. Leslie Ray Sharping was born in Galveston, Texas, November 20th, 1942. Passed away January 30th, 2017, which was 29 years longer than expected and much longer than he deserved. Leslie battled with cancer in his later years and lost his battle, ultimately due to being the horse's tail he was known for. He leaves behind 2 relieved children, a son, Roy, and a daughter, Sheila, along with 6 grandchildren, countless other victims, including an ex-wife, relatives, friends, neighbors, doctors, nurses, and random strangers. At a young age, Leslie quickly became a model example of bad parenting combined with mental illness and complete commitment to drinking, drugs, womanizing, and being generally offensive. Leslie enlisted to serve in the Navy, but not so much in a brave and patriotic way, but more as part of a plea deal to escape sentencing on a criminal charge. While enlisted, Leslie was the Navy boxing champion and went on to sufficiently embarrass his family and country. Leslie was surprisingly more than being reckless, wasteful, squandering the family savings, and fantasizing about get-rich-quick schemes. Leslie's hobbies include being abusive to his family, expediting trips to heaven for the beloved family pets, and fishing. He did not contribute to society or serve his community, and he possessed no redeeming qualities besides quick-witted sarcasm, which was amusing during his sober days. With Leslie's passing, he will be missed only for what he never did, being a loving husband, father, and good friend. No services will be held. There will be no prayers for eternal peace and no apologies to the family he tortured. Leslie remains will be cremated and kept in the barn until Ray, the family's donkey's wood shavings, run out. Leslie's passing proves that evil does in fact die and hopefully marks a time of healing and safety for all. Can you imagine that? This girl wrote about her dad. And folks, I've done one of those services. I was called here in Paris. I was called one day. They asked me if I would do one. And I read there's a guy I'd never met. I mean, I was just out of the blue. And I'd read his obituary and read a little bit about him. There was absolutely nothing good to say about him. And I mean, I'll tell you up front and honestly, you preach, I just get the highlights of it. I mean, that's honestly, that's it. I don't build you up or tear you down. I state the facts and I use scripture to comfort your family. This guy here said he was a scoundrel. I didn't build him up. I didn't tear him down. I just stated the facts. His daughter, and I didn't know if his daughter was there. She came up to me after the service. She said, "I want to thank you." I thought she was really going to look at me. I said, "Thank me." She said, "Yeah." She said, "He was not a good man." She said, "I'm glad you didn't paint him out to be a good man." You know, fathers, what we get out of life in the end is what we put into life as we live it. Bottom line. Number 3, discipline your children. As I said, fathers, do not provoke your children. You know, dads, our children need discipline. They do. This timeout generation is not working. You know, the thing is, just let them do what they want. They'll be all right. It's not working. They need a strong man who repeats instructions over and over and over again to ensure that they get it. My Sunday school lesson is out of the book of Joshua. They say the Old Testament writers would write the exact same thing over and over and over again as it was repetitive, and that way it will sink into your brain. How do you study for tests? You go over and over and memorize it. That's how we do all of it, memorize it. And that's the thing. As fathers, we need to teach our kids. I can remember my dad yelling when he'd tell me in his loud voice, how many times am I going to have to tell you? Well, evidently one more time, But and I'm terrible about that too, I'm like, I'm not telling you no more. But we do. They need somebody to punish them when they're wrong. And I'm not talking about spanking. Of course, my generation, we all survived it. Now, I'm not talking about beating either. There's a whole different story there. But, the thing is, they need to realize that there are boundaries. You don't cross these boundaries. That's the thing we need to focus on. To be an effective parent, you have to be creative. You have to discipline your children by reinforcing the lessons that don't want to learn. Because why? Kids need discipline. And I know this because I was young once. Me and discipline, I think we're on a first name basis back when I was growing up. But the thing is, your children need to engineer circumstances to ensure that they're learning the lessons. Hebrews 12:6 tells us this: for the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. And let me throw this in there. God isn't disciplining you if you're not a legitimate child. You stop to think about that. We live in I have to talk about her now. She's here. Yeah. We're living in a world now where we have this phrase, day deprivation. I had not heard of it until I was studying for this. Daddy deprivation was coined by Blake Wilson. He's a pastor in Houston, Texas, to describe the cultural phenomena where children grow up without their fathers. Daddy issues are widespread throughout socioeconomic and ethnic strata in our culture. Now, I'm going to give you an example of two of these, what it's talking about, so you understand. First was Brent. Brent's father has been missing in most of his growing up years, even though he was present. Yes, his father was physically present, but emotionally absent, because Brent never really connected to the heart of his father. He is currently debating on life choices. Chris's mom has 8 children with 3 dads between them. The promiscuity that she ignored her, you caught up with her when she was ready to be responsible. Her children wanting to connect with their fathers as they grew older. She said, unfortunately, if she was honest, she really wasn't completely clear on the identity of her children's father. And like I said before, started off with tonight, about 40% of American children will go to sleep in homes where their father do not live. Before they reach the age of 18, more than half of our nation's children are likely to spend at least a significant portion of their childhoods living apart from their fathers. Our children are an extension of us. The Bible says that a child can bring his mother shame. Proverbs 29:15 says, the rod of rebuke gives wisdom, but a boy set off causes shame to his mother. And why is that? As I said, our kids are extensions of us. Their lives are in us. Our lives are in them. We have a responsibility. Yes, I think men have more responsibility than women do, because if you read the Bible, study the Bible, you will see that, the responsibility that God gave men. We look at that, at the realization, and it brings us to number 4. The number 4 is this. It's short. Instruct your children. If you don't tell your children and teach them the difference between right and wrong, there's somebody outside your house that will teach them otherwise. And, the thing is, in all reality, my time is gone. My kids have grown to be great men. Most of the time, without my help, destroy your family and you. You become aware that there are enemies, sympathizers who are living and working in your city, hoping to undermine your city in this argument. So, fathers, you have to be the voice in your children's head when they get out and have to face those choices. your voice in their head might make the only difference in their life. So I said, teach them to think about the consequences, especially moral consequences to their decisions. Those are 4 things that we as fathers can do. And yes, there's those like me. I know there's a lot of us here that our fathers are not with us anymore. I'm going to close with this poem. It's called The Empty Chair. It says, the old familiar place remains where you would sit at close of the day. The house is quiet on the street, though echoes of your laughter play. Your chair is empty to the eye. No smoke, no paper, no soft tread. But in your heart, you're sitting there with all the wisdom that you see. I glance across the empty room. I see the memories taking flight. The way you'd smile, the way you cared, a steaming warmth in fading light. You never truly leave this space or the deep love we came to share. Through wood and cushion, but still, my soul will always find you there. I ask as we stand, every head bowed, every eye closed. God has come this morning. Father, we come before you this morning. We are thankful for this Father's Day. Father, I know as we celebrate Father's Day that, Father, there's still some things that we have to realize that, Father, that the kind of man that we